have everybody on the board here. I want to introduce John Walham from, and you're the regional director of ORPS?
The Southern Region Awards.
Okay. And Linda Levine, Sullivan County Real Property?
Real Property Tax Director.
Okay. So with that, and do you want to introduce you guys too, huh? Renee, everybody knows Renee. And Virginia. And we don't have to campaign for So I'll let you guys take it over. You want to start it?
Sure. As you know, the town is in dire need of a reassessment, and this is what Virginia and I are hoping to work on over the next 2 years. We've already started. What we're going to do over this year is concentrate on data collection, getting all our inventory correct, and then we will work on changing assessments, and it will be completed for the 2015 tax roll. And to help give you a better understanding of the reassessment process and why we need it and how inequitable our role is right now, we've invited John Walham to come and speak to us, so he can
Okay.
provide an explanation.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me here this evening. What this is really intended to do is to provide a little bit of background about, about the property tax system, hopefully make it a little bit clearer, and show how reassessment is an integral part of that. They're paper copies of the presentation. In the interests of time, there are a number of slides of general interest from after page 7, so I'm not necessarily going to go through those, but they are available, and for anyone who has questions that don't get answered here this evening, my contact information, email and phone number are on the very last slide on the last page. So I think everybody understands, or certainly has familiarity with property tax bills.
No.
You know, you have that pleasure twice a year, as do we all. So everybody, I think, understands and recognizes that, look, the property tax is the way funding is raised for a number of different taxing jurisdictions: the county, the town, villages, cities, school districts, and special district authorities. The amount of money that those taxing jurisdictions need to raise, that's based on a budgeting process. That's half of the property tax cycle, if you will, or the system. We're not going to get into that. We're really going to get into how property tax is determined, assuming that the amounts to be raised have already been established by these taxing jurisdictions.
Yes.
Everybody, I think, knows that the town, all towns in Sullivan County, publish an assessment roll every year. In fact, the town is working towards publishing a tentative assessment roll for this coming May 1st. Now, every assessment roll is governed by certain parts of, of property tax law, and it's worth spending just a minute or two on those. The first is the assessment standard, Real Property Tax Law 305, and that basically says that, look, assessments have to be based on the market value of property, and more importantly, that every single property that is assessed on a town's roll must be assessed at the same uniform percentage of value. Doesn't matter what the percentage is. New York State allows the municipality, the assessing unit, to establish that. So it could be 1%, it could be 100%. Excuse me. The lowest percentage I'm familiar with is in Nassau County, where one type of property is assessed at 1/4%. And of course, there are a fair number of places that maintain 100% of value in their assessments annually. So that's a key component right there, value and how it's established for assessments. There are two other parts that all three of these go kind of hand in glove with one another. One is the valuation date. So when an assessment roll is published, value, that uniform value we talked about, has to be established as of the same point in time for every property for that particular assessment roll. And for those of you who either appraise property or who have gotten an appraisal on your property, you'll probably remember that your appraisal is always as of a particular point in time. That's a key function of determining value. That value is established as of one point in time, and that's what that represents. So for properties among all the town assessing units in Sullivan County, that valuation date is July 1st of the preceding year. So, the uniform percentage of value for the town of Delaware for 2013, for your forthcoming roll, hasn't been established yet. So, the uniform percent that was established for your last roll, your 2012 roll, was 65. So that meant that all properties, the assessments were meant to represent 65% of market value. The valuation date was July 1st of the preceding year, so it would be 65% of market value as of July 1st, 2011 for your 2012 roll. And then taxable status date, that simply is the point in time at which inventory is measured. In other words, whatever physically exists gets assessed, and that's as of March 1st each year. So, looking backwards for your 2012 roll, all the assessments on your 2012 roll were meant to represent 65% of market value for each property, with value having been established as of July 1st, 2011, with whatever physically existed as of March 1st, 2012, reflected in that assessment. The same thing will happen for 2013, except the valuation date will be a year later. Your valuation date will be July 1st, 2012. Whatever physically exists will be measured as of March 1st, 2012, and a new percentage of value for all your properties will be established. The town hasn't established that yet. I'm going to guess that it'll probably be maybe a couple of points higher than 65, but again, you'll know that once your roll is established on May 1st. So, what's the assessor supposed to do? Provide fair assessments. Keep inventory of all properties, help taxpayers understand assessments, process exemptions, maintain changes using the computerized software. These are all day-to-day aspects of the assessor's work. But now, let me just take a minute and bring this back to property tax and the property tax bills you all pay so graciously. Here's the thing. The goal of property tax is fairness. Everybody wants to pay a fair tax. You don't want to pay more than you should. And I think, I can't say you shouldn't pay less than you should. I think people would be happy to pay less than they might, but the goal of the system, the goal of the assessors, their job is to ensure that people pay a fair amount. Now, the idea of fairness in the assessment roll goes back to those three components we just talked about. Everyone, I think, will recognize that property changes at different value, at different rates. Different kinds of property will change in value faster or slower than other types of property. It's fair to say that in New York, probably up until around 2008, we had an appreciating market. Then values have been going down. Now it's kind of a mix. Values are largely stagnant. Certainly there are places where values are still decreasing, and there are isolated pockets here and there in various places where values are actually going up, depending on the property that's in demand. Here's the point. Unless assessments are regularly recalibrated to reflect current market value as of the annual valuation date of the assessment roll, it's inevitable that assessments will not keep pace with changes in market value, and over time, some assessments will reflect higher market values that are probably appropriate, and some will reflect lower market values that are appropriate. When that happens, people will pay, some will still pay about the right amount. And we have a handout which will try to give sort of an illustration of that relative to the town of Delaware. But bottom line is, unless this is done regularly, it's inevitable that there will be unfairness in how the property tax is distributed. And again, just to say it as clearly as I can, that's the function of the assessment role. Plain and simple, the assessment role is intended to ensure as fair a distribution of property tax as reasonably can be made. And that's based on ensuring that assessments truly reflect the same uniform percentage of market value as of the applicable valuation date, with whatever physically exists being measured as of the taxable status date. So this is more or less saying the same thing that I just blathered on about, that unless periodically there are municipal-wide reassessments, the assessor, despite his or her best intentions, is unable to do that. Why? Because in the absence of a town-wide reassessment, which typically assessors do not take upon themselves, they need authorization from municipal boards to do this, because there are resources and additional expense and so on and so forth. But absent that authorization, assessors legally can only make changes in the roll to account for new construction or demolition or changes resulting from the Board of Assessment review, court order reductions, certiorari's, things of that nature. That's not to say that an assessor is powerless to assess, but absent the structure of a town-wide reassessment, the assessor runs the very real risk of being accused of selective reassessment. And this is because legally, if you go and change an assessment, even though you think you're making the right choice, unless you can demonstrate that similar property throughout your assessing unit is being treated the same way, the person whom you've reassessed can come back and say, well, you've changed my assessment, but you didn't change anybody else's. You increased mine to reflect a selling price, but guess what? There are other properties that are like mine, you didn't change them. That's known as selective reassessment, and that's illegal. So it's really the formal structure of reassessment that allows the assessor to do what's necessary to ensure fair and equitable assessments. And again, one of the weaknesses, unfortunately, in New York State legal structure is that there is no set time period in which reassessment activity must occur. There are municipalities, I want to say it's probably about 300 on average each year that will reassess, and a large number of those actually reassess annually. They maintain a level of assessment of 100. There are others that will do this periodically, but they're doing it because they know it's the right thing to do. Nobody is forcing them to do this. Just to offer a little bit of a contrast, there is a municipality in Westchester, I won't name them so as not to embarrass anybody on camera, but this municipality last reassessed before the Civil War. Yep. And there is nothing, even though there is an annual valuation date in the law, which some people would say, well, look, here's a reason why reassessment should happen, but there is no consequence in the law when a municipality doesn't do this. So, again, this is why the town board is to be commended for taking on this project. And again, ultimately, it's really about fairness. I know reassessment tends to still get a lot of bad press, and we'll talk a little bit about that and why it's really not true. But again, the town board deserves the world of credit for doing whatever it can to ensure that the town's going to have an equitable distribution of property tax. So my hat's off to the town board for that. And this describes really what reassessment is all about. Simply put, it's a systematic analysis of all properties in the town. And again, it's designed, as I said before, to ensure that every property is assessed at the same percentage of value as of the valuation date of the applicable reassessment roll, with the taxable status date also taken into consideration. So the Town of Delaware's reassessment project is right now slated for the 2015 roll. So again, to try to put this into English, when your tentative roll is published in May 2015, your assessments are going to represent 100% of market value, with market value having been established as of July 1st, 2014, with whatever physically exists as of March 1st, 2015 being assessed. So if you build a new house by March 1st, that'll be assessed. If you don't build your new house until April 2015, that won't be captured for the roll until the following year. But that's what the reassessment in the town of Delaware is meant to achieve. Now, with the next two slides are meant to be their generic representations of reassessment and essentially the effects of when reassessment doesn't happen. So in this, we have this made-up community that last reassessed in 1969. We have two homes here, Smith and Jones. We're saying that both of them, there was a reassessment then, both had a value of $100,000, however that was determined, presumably through comparable sales, and they were both assessed at $100,000. So the tax rate is applied. We're going to assume there are no exemptions involved here because that can sometimes cloud the issue of fairness if you look at tax dollars paid. But if you look at assessment, they're both assessed at the same amount. Their assessments are both reflective of market value. And guess what? With the same tax rate applied, they paid the same amount of tax. And they're paying the same real tax rate. In this made-up example, they're both paying $1,000, so their property tax represents 1% of value. Now we're going to flash forward 40 plus years later. So in this case, and again, this is a made-up example, one home is now deemed to be worth $1 million. The other home is deemed to be worth $500,000. So they both appreciated, but one has doubled in value, or I'm sorry, gone up 10 times in value, the other's gone up 5 times in value. However, because there's been no reassessment, their assessments are still on the town's books at $100,000 each. So when the tax rates are applied, okay, taxes have gone up over 40 years, they're now paying $10,000 in taxes, but when you look at the taxes relative to the value of each home, one home, the $1 million home, is still essentially paying 1% of its value in taxes, the other is paying 2%. So the fellow who has a home that's only worth $500,000 is actually subsidizing the other property owner. Jones is paying more than his or her fair share. It's that condition that reassessment is meant to correct. Now, here's where we get into a little bit of information specific to the town of Delaware. My understanding is the town of Delaware last went through a reassessment in 1991, so it's been a little over 20 years. Now, the idea behind this is that properties that have similar value should be assessed reasonably similarly. There's no such thing as a perfect assessment roll, I gotta stress that, but there's an organization known as the International Association of Assessing Officers that sets standards for how assessing work should be done. And you know, the name says international, so they do this worldwide. And there are two basic tests that look at what's known as assessment uniformity. And again, it's really trying to measure whether properties of similar value are assessed similarly. One of these statistics is called the coefficient of dispersion, and that's really if you have a group of homes that are worth $100,000, that's basically saying that the assessment should be, to use the standard here, and I'll explain this, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but if you have homes that are worth $100,000, the assessment should fall in a range of roughly $80,000 to $120,000. There's a recognition that, you know, you want to get it as good as you can, but there's a recognition it's not going to be perfect. So given the population density in the town of Delaware, an acceptable result for this particular test would be 20. For the town of Delaware, for residential property, it's 20.49. So again, that's not that bad given the relatively rural nature of the town. And again, what that's saying, to put it in real numbers, is that if you have a group of homes that are worth $100,000, in all likelihood, the assessments are probably going to fall in a range of $80,000 to $120,000. You might have some that are above or below that, but that's going to be more or less the average, if you will. However, there's another test here called the price-related differential. This is, essentially, this is a test that's meant to look at whether properties of different value intervals are assessed fairly. So that, in other words, if you have properties that are worth a lot more, high-end properties, properties at the higher end of value, the value range in the town, that they're more or less being assessed at the same range of value, in the same range as properties at the lower end of value range. And here's where clearly something is a little out of kilter in the town of Delaware. The acceptable result for this test is between 0.98 and 103. For the town of Delaware, it's over 108, and this is a very high result. Typically, where we see this result over the normal range, it's, maybe over 103, 104, 105. 108.5 is one of the higher results we've seen. And what this is essentially saying, to put it in English again, is that properties at a higher range of value in the town are underassessed relative to properties at a lower range of value. And if you go back to that generic example, what that means in plainer English is that properties in a lower value range are essentially subsidizing property tax to some extent for higher value properties. That's the inequity in the role. Again, that's what the reassessment is meant to address. So we have some stuff here about reassessment and what it does. I'll go through these briefly. The biggest thing relative to the town of Delaware is fairness. That's really the biggest reason for doing a project like this, is to ensure that you have fairness in the assessment role and that property tax is being distributed as fairly as possible. Transparency, when you have assessments at 100% of value and people know they've been recently recalibrated to market value, it makes it a heck of a lot easier for them to understand. If they say, look, my assessment is $100,000, they can say, is that my market value? They can make an easier decision as to whether, all right, I think my property is fairly assessed. I may not like my taxes, but I think the town has my value reasonably right. Or you know what? No, somehow the town got this wrong. It sounds simplistic, but it never ceases to amaze me how in many towns with fractional assessing, and I don't mean the town of Delaware, I mean very, very low fractions, like when you get down below 10 or 5%, people, they don't make the connection between their assessment and the value implied by their property. They tend to, well, if I say something, maybe it's going to go up. The reassessment process, by getting those assessments to reflect 100% of value, as corny as this may sound, it really helps property owners engage in an examination of, well, is my assessment fair? And it gives them a little more information, actually a lot more information, because they'll have updated inventory records and whatnot, by which they can have an informed conversation with Virginia and Renee. Is it fair? Here are some things about my property I think you may have missed in considering a value. Tax neutral. Reassessment, there are still a lot of folks who believe that the process of reassessment is sort of this end-around effort to try to raise taxes. It's not so. Reassessment is budget neutral. The only aspect of that which I would qualify is it does increase a town's budget to the degree that there are additional costs incurred in doing a project. Now, to folks who may be viewing this who may be concerned about the added cost, I have to say that the town of Delaware is approaching this project very, very responsibly. So far as I know, there is no consideration of hiring an outside vendor. The town has deliberately planned out a time frame, and we do have a slide a little bit later that will hit the major points, the major timeline of the project. But they have timed the project in such a way so that Virginia and Renee can do this work in-house. So yes, there certainly may be some additional costs in terms of the hours they put in, mailing costs for different pieces of mail associated with the project. But the good news to you as taxpayers of the town is that once again, the town has done its utmost to limit the costs of achieving fairness in the role. And, you know, that speaks to the town's commitment of acting fiscally responsibly. So once again, I think the town board deserves some credit for how it's choosing to approach this. Reduced litigation, I don't know offhand the extent to which the town has lawsuits regarding property taxes. I know you do have a couple of larger properties. Bottom line here, what typically happens in reassessments, or as a result of reassessments, is that coming out of the reassessment, once values are reinitialized and once property owners have had the ability to talk with the assessor and say, hey, look, I understand you've done this value, but here are aspects of the value I don't think you may have gotten right, aspects of my property you may not have considered. Typically, the number of challenges become greatly reduced. That may not happen in the initial year of the reassessment because, again, there's a lot of heightened interest and a lot of people may be looking at the results far more closely and saying, ooh, no, I want to protest this. And that's okay, that's part of the process. But in subsequent years, it is almost always the case that the number of challenges that occur drop off sharply. And where you continue to have challenges, it becomes far easier for the town to defend those challenges because you've got current and accurate valuation information and current and accurate inventory about the property. Local control, a lot of folks don't like equalization rates, which is something that we do. By doing a reassessment, you are in effect taking control of your equalization rate. The reassessment process that you will be going through looks at every single property in the town. And in the course of doing that, we, as the folks who make equalization rates, we say, you know what, that is a much more detailed process than we can use, because given that we have to do the whole state every year, we look at a process of limited appraisals done in a cycle, small handful of appraisals, and statistical analysis. On the other hand, in the project you're going to be doing, Renee and Virginia will be looking at the value of every individual property in the town. So we do look over the shoulder of what Renee and Virginia will be doing. We do monitor the project. We help out to the degree we can. Our end goal is to be able to say, yes, we think that the town has achieved its stated level of assessment, which it would be 100% on its 2015 roll within a reasonable tolerance. We would do some testing to verify that, but then that 100% would become your equalization rate. Some municipalities look at reassessment as a way of improving their bond ratings and revitalizing their local economy. Earlier, well actually it was last year, I did a public meeting at a town in Ulster County which is doing a data collection. They hope the project will become a reassessment, but the elected officials there, I think, have come to a very strong realization that their assessments, this is a town, they cannot even determine the last time a reassessment was done. We started issuing equalization rates in the early 1950s. There is no evidence that a reassessment was ever done in that time period. So again, it's been a long time. And they see such enormous disparities in their assessments and the resulting property taxes that they are recognizing this is having a hugely detrimental impact to their real estate market. People are not willing to buy property there. The sales are greatly diminished because of this wide disparity in property taxes amongst their property. So they are hopeful that their data collection will become a reassessment. And that's an example of the effect that sometimes can be achieved. I'm not trying to suggest that it's anywhere near that bad in the town of Delaware. Please don't misunderstand. But clearly, there is evidence that it's a necessary process. It's needed here. The last one, I wish I could say this was a more compelling reason. The amount of state aid available to a town that does a reassessment is pretty minimal. Once the 2015 roll is implemented, the town would be eligible for up to $5 per parcel, which is not a whole lot of money. That's all I can say. I can only hold out hope that someday the amount might be increased, but we'll see. Maybe by 2015 something will happen, but for the time being, that's the way that stands. And the bottom line here, there's a little note at the bottom which is worth dwelling on for a moment. Regular reassessment at market value is the only way to ensure that all taxpayers pay their fair share. So once the town has done this, once the town has invested the time and effort of Virginia and Renee in achieving an equitable role, the town will want to consider some sort of a cycle, regardless of what that cycle may be, for maintaining it. So you don't end up with another situation where you've gone 20 years and things have kind of deteriorated. Because, again, the moral of the story is the more time elapses between reassessments, the more painful the process can be, the more fear people have about it, because they're very, very worried about shifts that may happen. Actually, you know, I'll tell you what, let me get through this and then I'll go to the other slide. The slide, silly me, I got talking too much. When we were talking about the COD and the PRD, I wanted to go to the other handout that I had, which talked about observations of sales in the town of Delaware, but since I'm almost through this, we'll save that towards the end. Reassessment timetable. The town's going to be going through a data collection, and essentially what that is a process by which the town will be visiting properties. It will be done, if I remember correctly, from the public right-of-way. I don't think the town is going to be looking to do attempts at interior inspections, if I remember right. Okay, so it's just going to be done from the public right-of-way, and it's going to be meant to either confirm or correct the town's existing property record cards. There may be instances where the assessors will need to set foot on the property if they see that the sketch of the house is either lacking or missing some entity. There may be instances where some of that, they'll need to set foot on the property, but obviously they will be sending out information in advance when they go out. But that data collection is meant to ensure that the physical characteristics of the property on the town's records are correct. Land, buildings, improvements, things of that nature. All of that is very important in establishing value. And if that's not right, any attempt at developing value is probably going to be flawed. Probably sometime in the spring of 2014, all of you as property owners will be receiving what's known as an inventory data mailer. And this will be a little document that gives you the high points of the inventory characteristics that have been collected for your property. Land size, your building style, you know, the approximate square footage of living area, whatever information may be on the town's record for number of bathrooms, you know, fireplaces, things like that. That'll be an important point because you as property owners, that's your first real opportunity to give the assessors feedback to say, yeah, you know what, this is right, or no, this isn't right. And if it's not right, you may want to have the assessor come back to your property, possibly take them through it to ensure, once again, that the town's records accurately reflect what you have, no more, no less. Sometime in the summer of 2014, the town is going to be going through evaluation process. Town's going to be examining sales information for residential property. They're going to be collecting various sales over a period of time. We have a slide a little later on that talks to the approaches of value. I'll touch on that very, very briefly. Now, residential property typically is done through the sales comparison approach. That's the approach that is accepted by the courts. Vacant land, and even as a backup for residential property or commercial property, there's something known as the cost approach, which is an attempt to determine through various schedules what it would cost the land, and to build the improvements less depreciation. And then I know the town has a very small number of commercial properties, but the typical approach for commercial valuation that is upheld by courts is what's known as the income approach. And this is not business income, I must stress that. The only income that the assessors would consider would be the amount of rental that could be generated by the commercial space. Business value does not come into play here. It's a capitalized approach to the amount of rental income for the commercial space, less expenses. So the valuation, the mass appraisal, and this is mass appraisal, it's not a fee appraisal where somebody's going out and doing an individual appraisal of every home. There will be individual documents produced for every property, but again, this is a mass appraisal process. Just to provide some perspective, I would say that if any of us went and got an individual fee appraisal for our homes, we would probably spend, in this day and age, somewhere, I'm going to say in the $350 to $500 range. And obviously, the town is not spending that sum of money to appraise every property individually. That's why for reassessment projects, this mass appraisal process is typically what's used. So, in the fall and winter of 2014, Virginia and Renee will be going through a field review where they will take the computerized estimates of value and they will once again be looking at every property to say, does this value make sense? Or are there aspects of the property that, from what we know, were not captured by the mass appraisal process? And they're going to make an adjustment where they feel necessary to come up with a preliminary assessment. The next phase, which is very, very important to all property owners, is known as assessment disclosure. And that'll probably be taking place sometime in February of 2015. The best way I can describe assessment disclosure is to say it is a process that looks at the existing assessments. It will take the most recently extended tax levies, and it will say, all right, if these new preliminary assessments that are intended for the 2015 roll had been in place to raise the same tax levies for town, county, and school purposes, and this would be the January 2015 town county levy and the September 2014 school levy, here's what your tax distribution would have looked like. So it's not predicting future taxes, it's taking the most recent tax levies, it's taking the actual assessments so that you will know what you actually paid for each of those tax levies, and then had everybody's new assessment, new preliminary assessment, been in effect to raise the same levies, here's what your share would have looked like. Now, those notices will probably be going out roughly the end of February, beginning of March. Then the town will enter what's known as an informal review process. In the year of a reassessment, you do not have to wait until the tentative roll is filed on May 1st to question the assessment of your property, which you would typically do with the assessor, and if you can't come to a meeting of the minds, at grievance day. In the year of a reassessment, the informal review process allows you to come in and speak with Renee and Virginia and say, hey, look, can you give me a little more information about how my preliminary assessment was established? And or you have the ability to say right then and there, okay, you're valuing me at $200,000, but I think there's some aspects of my property that you may not have considered. I'm near a creek, my land floods when it rains, whatever the reason may be. You can present any of all of that to them, they will consider it, and your assessment may change as a result. After the informal review, the town's tentative roll will be published on May 1st, 2015, and then if you are still not satisfied, you're free to go through the normal grievance process, which would be the fourth Tuesday in May. I don't remember what day that would be in 2015. Oh, I have it right there. Duh, May 26th. I did look at the calendar, I guess. Okay, so May 26th, that would be your normal course of events. Grievance Day is an annual process. Some of you may have gone through that already at some point. But again, the important thing here to know is that you have an opportunity before the roll will even be filed to come in and get information about your value and to question it and to possibly get it changed. The next two slides I'm going to skip. This has to do with something known as a cyclical reassessment program. This is something that the town may consider, but it's a little premature right now. For those of you who want to look in the handouts, it's in there. But again, this would be something, this would be a potential program the town could consider as a way of ensuring that there's a cycle for keeping assessments current. This slide simply hits on the three approaches to value that we've already touched on. The rest of the slides in this presentation deal with more generic information, budgeting, and tax levies. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through that. It's in the handout, so again, whoever wants it can look at that. I am going to go to one other handout here, or one other presentation. I know this is going to be hard to see, so for the folks who are in the room, you may want to take a look at the handout. This is not meant to be any hard and fast analysis. This is simply a series of observations of sales in the town. Now, what we did here is we looked at sales in the calendar year preceding the town's upcoming valuation date. As I mentioned at the beginning, the town's forthcoming 2013 roll, filed in this coming May, will have a valuation date of July 1st, 2012. So we looked at sales that occurred in the calendar year before that valuation date. So these are arm's length sales and only arm's length sales, meaning they should be legitimate indicators of value from July 1st, 2011 through June 30th, 2012. The only sales here that I deliberately excluded, there were a number of condominium sales, and for reasons I won't dwell on, condominiums by law in New York State, at least law as it presently applies to the town of Delaware, cannot be assessed at market value. So I thought it would be unfair to leave those in there because it would give you a skewed ratio. You're not comparing apples to apples with condominiums, so I deleted those. All the other sales here, as I said, represent the arm's length sales, or at least the arm's length sales that we saw in the sales database for the town of Delaware for that 1 year period. And what I did is I arrayed these in sale price order. So there are some sales as low as $34,000, and the highest sale, and again, not all of these are necessarily residential. The highest sale, this was an exempt property, 1.3 million, but the majority of these sales are residential. Now, you heard me say earlier that the town's level of assessment last year was about 65%. And again, I wouldn't expect that to change dramatically for 2013. It hasn't been set, so I don't want to prejudge what the town's going to do, but in all likelihood, it would probably be maybe 1 or 2 points higher than that. So what we did in the very last column is we simply computed the ratio of assessment to selling price, assessment over selling price. You can see here that there's a lot of variation in these ratios. Up here we have 1.43, 2.12. You'll see ratios around 70, 0.58. It runs the whole gamut. The lowest ratio I see here is about, well, actually, here's one at 17%, 18%. The highest one I'm seeing is 212%. Now again, this is simply meant as observations. We're not drawing any conclusions. It's just meant to show you that while the town says that the average market value that each assessment is meant to represent is about 65%, you can see for these properties that sold, you have a very wide range that goes anywhere from 17% all the way up to a high of 212%. And again, this is meant to offer nothing more than simply some observations about why the reassessment process is necessary and what the reassessment process would be meant to correct. So to the extent possible, it's all, when the reassessment is done, it will be all about getting the assessments to reflect 100% of the probable or reasonable market value, with value being established as of July 1st, 2014. And with that, I'm going to stop. I'll be happy to take any questions or comments? Linda, I don't know if you want to add anything, or?
No.
Okay.
I think you covered everything.
Okay.
I have
I would like to just add one thing. We're updating the town website, and on the website, we have a section for the assessor's office. We have a list of frequently asked questions about reassessments and what it involves and what the procedure is. We'll also have another section where we'll have the different neighborhoods and road names listed, and we're going to update that periodically to let people know when we will be in their neighborhood. So when they see the data collector coming around, they'll know what's going on. So we advise the public to check the website frequently.
The website is it gonna tell, you're gonna do this geographically, right?
Pretty much.
So, some section of town
Right, we'll
you're
do.
gonna do, and then when that's done, you're gonna go to another section of town.
Right.
Are we gonna tell the folks, are we gonna tell our citizens when that, is it gonna be in the website?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's the, what roads, what areas we're gonna be in.
Okay.
We have with 16 groups.
Yeah.
So we have maybe 5 or 6 roads in one group, and we'll do all those at the same time.
Okay.
So we'll put the week or 2 weeks that we'll be in that neighborhood, so people will know.
The question that's always remained in my mind, years ago when the taxable, the valuation date was January 1st.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden got kicked back 6 months.
Yes.
And I have no understanding as why that was done.
Yeah, that's a great question. That happened, that was a change in law. I believe it happened around 2005. And relative to the valuation date, just as the town has a valuation date, you heard me say that we issue equalization rates.
Yeah.
And we too are obligated to use a valuation date, the same valuation date for the equalization rates that we issue for every assessing unit throughout New York State. What was happening when the valuation date was January 1st, and of course, the vast majority of places in New York State publish a tentative roll May 1st. If you're doing a townwide valuation and your valuation date is January 1st, you may not even have sales for those last couple of months until a month or two after January 1st. So it almost becomes physically impossible to do your work to incorporate those sales in your preliminary estimates of value. In other words, you have to go by the assessment calendar, but what people were finding, because this requires valuation, then you have to go out and field review all your estimates of value in order to do the preliminary assessments for that disclosure process I mentioned. People were finding that, you know what, they couldn't physically do it. They ended up having to cut off their sales for their valuation by roughly sometime in the summer. And we, for our own statistical analysis, we were finding the same difficulty. How do you wait until January 1st or later and then try to get this all done for the entire space in the matter of months?
That was a time issue.
Exactly, it was a timing issue. So it was moved back 6 months to July 1st of the preceding year. There are people who, I don't think it's a real large number, but there are people who still actually suggest it should be pushed back even further. But I don't know of any efforts to try to do that.
Or you do that, you're gonna definitely get into a different market, maybe.
Well,
You know, it could go either way, though.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. The next question I have has to do with taxable status date, as explained here.
right.
It's not the date that concerns me, it's the value that concerns me.
Mhm.
We're talking about an improvement or anything that you find, you know, that would in place or out of place, isn't there anymore as of the first day of March. But it says, it should be determined annually according to its condition and ownership as the first of the condition as of the 1st of March. How do you equate that to the valuation date back into July 1st? We got two different valuation dates here. We have one in July and we have one as of March, what's on there on March 1st. Unless you revalue that new item or the lack of that new item back to July 1st.
And that's exactly it. You gave the
That
answer.
clarifies, is it?
Right.
That clarifies.
There's only one valuation date.
That's-
But if something's built up until March 1st,
Yep.
The
You
assessors
catch it,
have-
and you put it on there, when it's
Exactly.
valued back here, that's fair, that's.
Exactly so.
Right.
Another one.
No, please.
All right, just for my own edification, the coefficient of dispersion.
Right.
It talks about middle, you're talking about median in the range?
Yeah.
Okay. And then in the next one, the price related differential, you're talking about the mean divided by the weighted mean. Can you explain how you determine a weighted mean?
The weighted mean, and thankfully I actually know this because I'm not a statistician. The weighted mean essentially, if you have, okay, I flipped
Pull your
it.
worksheet up.
Yeah, let me put that worksheet up, that's gonna help.
That's easier.
Yep. All right. Okay, I didn't compute a weighted mean here, but
Okay.
essentially a weighted mean, you have each of these ratios is the assessment
Yeah,
divided by the
divided
selling
by-
price.
Correct.
A weighted mean would be the sum of all of the assessments,
Divided by all of those.
the sum
Okay.
of all of the sale prices.
This is just an old
It's a
phrase of
ratio,
mine
but
asking
that's
questions.
the weighted mean.
Okay, thank you.
Sure,
That's a good one, thank you.
sure.
So the weighted means,
This
you
is
say
so-
here the results should be
Some.
between 0.98 and 103,
Right.
which is a plus or minus
Exactly.
from 1.
Yep.
And we're over that, so that means the total of both columns, one divided by the other, is much higher than what it should be.
Yeah, the weighted mean is only part of this because it's the mean, which is the average divided by the weighted mean. So it's an additional calculation. But I think your point is right, that because the result of this particular test for Delaware is much higher than the accepted range, it indicates that there is a problem with the assessments. If, to the degree that the result is greater than 103, and in this case the result is substantially greater than 103, it's very rare that we see one that high, that means that higher valued properties, values, again, I'm not saying every property, but in general, properties in the higher ranges of value in the town appear to be generally underassessed relative to properties in the lower ranges of value. And that means from a tax distribution perspective, the folks with the lower value properties, I'm not saying across the board, but in general, the appearance is that they're paying more tax than they should.
Now, going back to coefficient of dispersion, you say an acceptable would be 20%, which I
Right.
gather is another plus or minus 20%. So really, if you're going on the low end, minus 20 on one side and plus 20 on another property, you could have a dispersion there of 40%, which
Yeah.
is awful high.
Yeah, and again, the ranges of statistics, they have different ranges for different population densities. The town of Delaware, being more rural, gets greater tolerance in that particular test. If you're in a more suburban community, the overall COD would be no more than 15, and if you're talking the residential part of it, you'd probably look to get it at 10 or less. Again, what the COD of 20 is saying, that if you have a group of $100,000 homes, it's reasonable to expect that the assessments for those properties are probably going to fall in the $80,000 to $120,000 range. Now, your
That's a
point,
lot of difference.
it is a
Yeah.
lot of difference. Here's the thing, and I know that difference can sound troubling. Part of what the assessors are doing here, part of their challenge in doing this project, is they are going to have a limited number of sales by which to establish value. But the majority of properties that they're going to be valuing will not have sold themselves. They're going to be using properties that have sold to help them get a sense of what a reasonable market value might be. And of course, we all know ultimately the proof is going to be in the pudding. If some of those properties happen to sell, you'll see how right or wrong it will be. What the COD is saying is that if you have that group of $100,000 properties, ideally, those assessments should fall in the $80,000 to $120,000 range. If that will happen, if successive sales fall within that range, the assessors will be seen as having done a very good job from this statistical perspective, given, again, the rural nature of the community, and given, that you don't have cookie-cutter subdivisions which make it much easier to predict value. Even though that seems like a big tolerance from the perspective of assessing standards, if that can be achieved, that's very good. Now, that also speaks to the other part of this, because as you say, you may not feel comfortable saying, well, is that really good enough? Are we going to live with that? That's why periodic maintenance of the roll, whatever form that works out to be, whether it's annual or every 3 years, or again, whatever the cycle turns out to be, but doing this periodically, that will prevent those disparities from getting too extreme. Because in those successive years, the assessors will be able to observe those sales, and again, whatever the cycle is in which they're allowed to re-examine assessments town-wide, they can go back and they can reset those. So that's a way of controlling that difference, that plus or minus 20% doesn't get too far out of hand.
Now, what happens, for instance, we do this, and it goes on the rolls in the next couple of years, and 5 years from now, who knows, property may escalate,
Right.
it may crash.
Right.
So how does a property 5 years from now, are we gonna judge it back to today rather than five, I mean, how do,
Depends on the number of sales
how do you,
and what you have.
would bring those properties in line with what's a baseline, in other words?
Right.
I can see that's a difficult situation.
It is, and that really, that speaks to the need, once again, for periodic reassessment. Again, whatever cycle the town feels comfortable with, because that's going to be the mechanism to allow you to capture whatever change in the market has occurred. If market values continue to go down, you're probably going to want to look at a cycle, a smaller cycle or a faster cycle, if you will, possibly annually, because if you go to 100% and values decrease the following year, you don't want to be in the position of somebody coming in and say, well, you've got me overassessed. You want to be able to reduce them. By the same token, if the market starts to change, and again, a couple of years from now, there'll obviously be some discussion as to what the town thinks may be an appropriate cycle. That cycle may even change depending on the nature of the market and the recommendation of your assessors and the volume of sales. But if properties start to appreciate, well, once again, if everybody is appreciating uniformly across the board, that's one thing. But if you have different parts of the town that are appreciating at different rates, it's only through the process of reassessment that you will be able to capture those differences in the assessments town-wide to preserve fairness. If you could honestly say everybody went up 10%, okay, if you raise everybody 10%, but everybody's changing the same way. The reality, though, is that it's very, very rare that all properties in a town move at the same rate. And that really speaks to the need that you're recognizing that, if you don't do something at a minimum periodically, you're going to lose that equity that you've created by doing this project.
Now, another question here, I can't find it, but there was something about assessing at a certain, 65%
Of market.
Oh,
of
right.
market value.
Yeah.
Why, what's
That's
the
where we
reason
are
for
now.
picking that
Right.
number? And who establishes that number?
That's part of the
Yeah, you're,
equal.
well, what happened is the town stated a level of assessment of 65% for 2012. We were able to confirm that because that's essentially the equalization program. We feel who better should know the level of assessment than the assessing unit's assessor. So ultimately, we do our own analysis, we share that with each assessing unit. Ultimately, the town's assessors said, we think that 65% is a reasonable number. We were able to confirm that, so that's why your equalization rate is also 65%. So that's what it was for 2012. You haven't published your roll this year yet. I mean, you know, because the market is still declining, I'm just gonna go out on a limb and guess that whatever percentage is established for 2013, it'll probably, you know, maybe a couple of points higher. But again, we'll know that in a few months.
Well, how,
We determined that based on the sales that we observed as compared to market value. So what we're saying is that from what we see in market value, we're only assessing at 65% of the market value
Of the sales price.
of the sales price.
Right.
So that's how we come up with that figure.
you're just, now, who determines what the market value is in the sale?
Based on the sales.
The sales, the
It's
market
the sales
itself,
that have occurred.
the market
Right.
itself, actual sales.
Arm's length sales.
Okay, I'm lost here somewhere.
The,
Market is defined by what sales, what houses or buildings are selling for.
Okay.
That is how your market price is defined. So we look at the sales of a certain period, and based on what we're seeing the market is saying houses are worth, we're saying, okay, we're only at 65% of market value right now.
What it means is $100,000 house, no wait, if a $100,000 house sells for 65,000, then we're assessing at 65, or do I have that
well,
backwards?
yeah, if a property sells for $100,000, the assessment is probably gonna be about 65,000.
Okay.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
assessing 65,000, but it will sell for 100, that's the
Right.
65%. If we were assessing at 80%, we'd have it assessed at $80,000 and it would sell for 100.
Right now, when you get your tax bill out, you're going to see that you're only paying taxes on 65% of what we feel your market value is for your
Right.
home.
But taxes, if it's 100%, what you're getting taxed on is less per thousand.
Exactly,
To make
your
the
tax
same-
rate will go down,
same-
yes,
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Yes.
That's right.
Because
You
the
know,
premise
because-
here is
Because the
that.
tax rate is based on the budget.
Exactly.
yeah, it's,
Yes.
we take the budget and divide it into all the parcels, and this what you come up with. So
Yes.
we need this kind of money, and
You're absolutely right.
so why wouldn't you base your taxes on 100%?
Well, that's what we wanna do.
That's
That's
what
what
we're
we
trying
wanna
to do.
achieve,
That's
by
exactly
doing
what
a
we're gonna
do.
reassessment.
That's why you need to revow,
Yeah.
That's exactly why we're here.
yeah.
Okay.
In other words, we wanna get that assessment value that they assess it equal to the market. Now,
Okay.
markets change and stuff like that. That goes this way, but the assessment always doesn't. It stays there. Unless
you're
there's a change.
reassessing,
Yeah,
Unless there's one?
unless you do a reassessment.
Okay.
so
Right.
that's the reason we're doing this.
But the real reason is the inequities.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not fair that somebody's not paying enough and somebody else is paying too much. We're trying to
Okay.
make it
Right.
so that
Now,
it's fair.
somebody, and this always baffled me, is, maybe we're talking about the same thing, maybe not, this equalization rate. Okay, what is it?
Here we go.
And who determines it?
Yeah, that's the job, well, ORPT is now a division of tax and finance, but that's what our job is. That's our primary job, the determination of equalization rates. Basically, I guess the easiest way I can say this, you heard me say earlier this evening that there is nothing right now that compels assessing units to reassess regularly. Because of that situation, there has to be a way to ensure at the larger level that taxing jurisdictions that contain more than one municipality have a way of fairly distributing taxes between those segments. And this would be county, because obviously all the towns in Sullivan County are components of the county tax, and certainly many of the school districts throughout the state
Yeah.
encompass more than one town or pieces of more than one town.
Because if I understand it, a property in the town of Delaware assessed at 100,000, and a property in Fremont or Coshocton is assessed at 100,000, but people are paying different amounts of money
Exactly.
to the school district.
Exactly.
And sometimes, just talking to somebody, there's a huge discrepancy.
Right. And see, here's the thing, and I think you said it. if everybody were assessing the same way, if everybody was assessing at 100%, if there was some structure that said everybody's got to do this no matter what the cycle, there would not really be a need for equalization rates. Because that's not happening, and because one town is assessing at 65, and another town may assess at 10, and another may assess at 100, and another may assess at 33, the equalization rate is needed sort of as a referee, if you will. It's the state coming in and saying, yes, this is the percentage of value that we really think this town is assessing at. And again, in most cases, we're able to confirm the locally stated level of assessment. But where we can't, then our analysis becomes the equalization rate. And the equalization rate is used to then make sure that, let's say at the county level, the equalization rate brings each town's taxable assessed value to full market value, because that's the only way you can distribute it fairly. You have to bring everybody to the 100%. Like you were saying, why wouldn't you do it at 100%?
That's right.
For an apportionment situation, like the county tax, everybody has to be brought to 100%, so then you have the tax pie, the taxable value, and you can figure out what percentage of taxable value each town represents. And it's the equalization rate right now that's the mechanism for bringing each town to full value. So that happens for the county tax. It also happens for each school tax where the school district is not wholly contained in a town. And that's why we have this.
So you take the statistics from each town
Yep.
and divvy them up and come out with this number, you on the state level then
Right,
determines this.
we do our analysis, we share that with the town. The jargon is pre-decisional collaboration. We provide that to the local assessment officials. They have the ability to review that, to provide us with their own analysis, and ultimately, they determine a level of assessment. And what we do is, once they've stated that level of assessment, which is, typically it's around the time shortly before the publication of the tentative roll on May 1st, if based on our independent analysis, we can confirm that number within plus or minus 5% of ours, the locally stated number becomes the equalization rate. Because frankly, when you're talking about the value of a town, nobody is that good to be able to say, our number is absolutely right and yours isn't. There has to be some reasonable tolerance.
Right. Okay.
So that's the simplified version, I guess, of equalization.
There was one little statement that you pointed out at the bottom, which I think is a very good thing for the public to realize, right there.
Okay.
It says to make sure that all taxpayers pay only their
Right.
fair share, not just their fair share, because people kind of, only their fair share. And I think that's something that the public should realize, that this is what we're striving for
Yes.
in this town.
Yep. Again, it's worth repeating, the reassessment process is meant to ensure that the standard of the distribution of property tax, which is property value, not everybody agrees with that. There are plenty of folks over the last 20 years who have said, I don't think it's fair that property tax should be used to raise school tax. Property value is not a good indicator of my ability to pay. All of these are very valid statements, but until such time as the legislature changes the legal structure for doing this, and this is the way it's done in New York, this is the way it's done virtually throughout the United States, and frankly in the vast majority of countries throughout the world, unless that standard is changed legally, property tax is going to be distributed based on your assessment, which is meant to represent property value. So there again, the only way, given that standard, you can ensure fair property tax is to make sure that the assessment is as fair a representation of market value and the same percentage of market value for every property throughout the assessing unit. It's all about fairness. It does not look at the amount of money to be raised. That's the budgeting process.
Unfortunately, people look at a reassessment from the perspective that the town wants more money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they don't separate the fact that our budgetary tax levy doesn't change.
Right.
only the amount of taxes that they pay
Right.
to meet that static tax
Yes.
levy.
That is absolutely true. And again, unfortunately, in New York, there are a lot of working parts to the property tax and why your bill is what it is. Even though for the majority of property owners and property taxpayers in the town of Delaware, your assessment, the value on the town's books, has probably not changed in a good many years because, again, there hasn't been a reassessment. You've probably noticed big differences, hopefully not too big, but in your property tax bill. And what we hear very frequently are situations, we get calls from property owners, I don't understand the school district, an unnamed school district. Well, they said their budget was only going up 2%, but my property tax went up 10%. How could this be? And it's because there are a lot of working parts. Your assessment may not have changed, but within your town, there are going to be some assessments that go up, some assessments that go down. There are exemptions that get added to the roll each year. There are some exemptions that come off. All of that changes the total taxable value of your town. Then that same process is going on in all of the other towns that have pieces of the school district. And depending on their locally stated level of assessment and whether or not that gets confirmed as the equalization rate and how those vary, if they all change at the same rate, let's say hypothetically all the equalization rates, however they're determined, they all go up 10%, everybody's moving at the same rate. But it's rare that you find that. One may go up 10%, the other may go up only 8%. So the one that goes up less is probably going to pick up a little greater share because the less, I'm saying it backwards, the more that the equalization rate or the level of assessment goes up from one year to the next, the more of an increase to overall property value is implied. If assessments aren't changing, and let's take the town of Delaware, if your assessments by and large aren't changing, which they aren't because you're not reassessing, and your level is 65%, and I'm going to take a greatly exaggerated number just for effect. Let's say that for 2013, your level of assessment becomes 80%. What does that mean? It means your assessments, which by and large haven't changed except for new construction and demolition, instead of representing 65% of value, they now represent 80% of value. So what that means is value in the town has gone down tremendously because your assessments, which haven't changed, represent a much bigger share of observed market value. And those changes in the rate are almost never constant from one town to another, and that's another factor of how tax shares at the segment level or at a town level can change. This happens with county apportionment, and it happens with pieces of towns for school purposes. And that's why this can be very, very difficult, unfortunately, to understand.
Then you have, on top of that, you have other districts. You have
Yes.
fire tax districts, you have
Yep.
ambulance tax,
Yep.
library tax, I mean,
And not all of these districts, not all of these taxing jurisdictions have the same geographic boundaries. So you have different makeups of the number of properties and the value of properties in different taxing jurisdictions. That'll also play a part.
we have three fire districts?
Yeah.
And there may be circumstances where, one district, let's say something catastrophic happened, like with the floods, maybe they have to rebuild a building. So perhaps their budget has to go up much more than otherwise would have been expected. That's all, of course, that's going to play a part too. There may be other forms of income to taxing jurisdictions, whether it's state aid or some other kind of aid. If that's affected, the tax levy, the amount that has to be collected through the property tax may have to go up. Even if the budget stays the same or goes down. That situation has happened too. And people say, oh, you lied to me. You said you were keeping the budget the same and my taxes went up. Well, no, the budget really did stay the same, but we had to get more of the budget from the property tax because we didn't get income, we didn't get the same amount of income we used to from other sources. So we had to make it up with the property tax.
That's the part they won't understand.
Yeah, it's always a tough sell.
When
No
there
doubt
is
about
a legal stipulation for value, and parties agreed to it, the assessors agreed to it, and the litigant agreed to that, how does reassessment now affect that? Let's say they agreed to a 3-year no change situation. What happens now with reassessment? Is that changed at that point, or am I asking a legal question here instead of an
It is a
assessment?
legal question, but what I can say typically, and again, I would defer to the thinking of the town's attorney on this, but typically, for instance, if it's a small claims assessment review, there typically is language that says, look, this value that's been agreed upon, assuming it was from a hearing officer or a judge, this will stay in place unless there's a reassessment. Typically, reassessment is a mechanism that allows that to be reconsidered, but if you're talking about an actual tax certiorari, which was a judgment, you'd have to look at whatever
Legal.
the actual
Legal.
judgment says. Yeah, and again, I would defer to the
Typically,
town
aren't they
attorney's
3
thinking.
years, though?
Well, that's a stipulation they can agree to.
Yeah, it used to be for the small claims assessment review, that used to be 3 years. I think that's actually now only 1 year.
It's only one.
Yeah.
It's 3.
And when I get to the big
It's
ones,
current
I like
year
to-
and the
I like to
following
do
year.
the other
Yeah.
thing.
What happens, I don't know if it's off topic here or not, but what happens, a property that's tax exempt,
Mhm.
religious organization,
Yep.
and they no longer use the church anymore for that purpose, or they don't use the summer retreat for that purpose anymore,
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be taxed again? Because it's not being used as it's just,
Yeah.
vacant.
It
Yeah.
absolutely should be, but it really becomes a tax certiorari case, right? I mean, they're pretty much upholding the religious exemptions in New York State.
Yeah. This is one of these questions that's very hard to answer generically because it's something that really you need to look at the specifics of each situation individually. Technically, yes, my understanding of the law with the exemption is that, it's gotta be used for the intended purpose. However, I do know recently, we get questions from municipalities from time to time, and for instance, a question recently came in about a school district that owns property and rents a portion of it out. And the way that particular part of the exemption law reads is that so long as they own it, it's still going to be exempt. And again, I'm not here to offer any kind of legal advice or opinion. This is just one particular circumstance. The best thing I can offer is that situations need to be looked at individually. If you have questions about that, you can feel free to bring them to us. Ultimately, this is something where we would always defer to the town's attorney, and ORPS does have counsel that the town's attorney could consult with on situations like that if he or she has questions.
Some of these exempt properties, it's a huge burden on all of, what's ours has gotta be, 20%? It's a huge amount.
Well, it's not just, like, for instance, we have federally owned property.
Yeah,
You have the railroad, you have a lot of, it really does say it. That means approximately 1/5 of the property in the town they're not paying taxes.
Yeah, I do know that under certain circumstances, and I couldn't offer you specifics here and now, but there are certain kinds of exempt properties that still are liable for paying certain kinds of special district taxes. And there again, it all depends on how the municipality historically has administered that. They may be liable, but have they necessarily put it on their books so they're collecting that? And sometimes, those situations can become controversial, as I'm sure you know much better than I do.
I say it's time for refreshments.
I vote.
Well, thank you for your time and
Thank you for your
attention.
time.
Good
Really
presentation.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I know the turnout wasn't quite what you had hoped. Hopefully, there are lots of people watching at home. I
They'll
know
see it
this
on
is
TV
riveting
tomorrow.
stuff, but certainly, if you want to do it again at some point, we'll be happy to do that.
Well, also, I want to make sure everybody takes each one of the handouts that we have back there, so you can refer to it and
Yeah,
share it with other people.
Yeah.
Also, tonight's PowerPoint, that's going to be on the website also.
Good deal. That's a good thing.
And that
Especially
should
that
be up by
was
the end of
only
this week.